Take a look at this one stem and see how many berries there are all the way along. Guten Gardening, everybody. You know, one of the plants that we don't talk enough about here at Guten Gardening is our gooseberry. And today I'm going to focus in on this gooseberry plant and tell you some of the reasons why I think you should be growing gooseberries. So let's get a closer look at this plant and talk about some of the amazing aspects that make this a delicious and well worthwhile berry to grow. Well, first and foremost, our gooseberry plant is nestled really cozily in between some grapes and some currants, but it's enjoying itself quite well. And this plant has been around and been growing for us for the past 6 years. Now, it does take a couple of years to start really producing, but once it hits that 2 to 3 year mark, you're going to start to see some absolutely outstanding berry production. Take a look at this one stem and see how many berries there are all the way along this stem. And so one of the benefits of growing one of these gooseberry plants is just how much productivity you get from a single plant. Now, typically speaking, if like us you have a smaller space garden, you're looking for plants that are going to provide a good deal of productivity. And it's not just the amount of gooseberries that we get each year on this plant, it's also the fact that you're going to have, once it starts producing, a good 15 to 20 years of berry production. Now, I'm sure that production can vary depending on how well you maintain the plant, but if I'm getting pound after pound of these berries every single year for 15 to 20 years with a perennial like this, then I'm going to say that's probably a pretty good investment. Now, interestingly enough, I'll also say that this is a pretty long harvesting season. You know, with raspberries, for example, I'll give our black raspberries as an example. They're ready when they're ready. That span of how long they're going to stay on before they're gone is maybe a week and a half, because they start to fall off, they start to dry up, and you really got to get out there and pick them. But with the gooseberries, they take a good bit longer to ripen up. I mean, these have been coming on all season long, and now we're here around the end of July, early August. They take a little bit longer to ripen up, but then it's not such a rush to get them off the plant. In fact, well, let me show you this. In fact, the ones I like to pick turn a purplish color, and these take a little bit longer. We also have someone here at the same time that are not as far along. You can see the difference in color here. We've got a greenish color versus this darker purplish color. And the longer they stay on there, that darker the purple, the sweeter they get. So I suppose that's another benefit of this particular plant. We've got a sweeter berry that's been on here longer, or if you like a little bit more tartness, you still have to wait until they soften up a little bit. But you can have a tartar taste as well if you harvest these a little bit earlier. So it's a longer growing season with multiple flavor profiles from the same plant. Now, I was just talking to somebody recently about how difficult it can be to get your point across when you're trying to describe the taste of something. So what I'll say about gooseberries is that they are grape-like. They have a similar texture to a grape, but a little sour. You know, when you eat a Concord grape and you have the inside is really sweet and then the exterior, the skin, is a little bit sour. It's not as sour as that skin, but it's somewhere in the middle. Maybe that's the best way for me to describe this. And if you eat one that's a little more green, then you get a little bit more of that sourness, that tartness. But it is so delicious. And my research indicates that this berry is high in vitamin C. It's a good source of antioxidants, a good source of fiber. So there's a whole bunch, and I'll actually put some of them on the screen right now, but there's a whole bunch of perceived benefits nutritionally for growing this berry. Now, a quick search online will tell you that this berry plant has been around for centuries, but interestingly enough, it has apparently become maybe a little less popular or a little less frequently grown in the last century or so. And I really don't think it should be. It's something that's been around for a long time, in part because there's so many different uses for the berries on here. Now, personally, what we typically do is freeze the berries and use them in smoothies. That's our #1 way of using these. But a close second to that for us is eating them on top of a little bit of yogurt or with our breakfast. You know, it's a nice little berry combo. Or, you know, maybe they don't make it inside at all because we eat them right off of the bush. But because they have some natural pectin, they're really good to use as well, according to our research, in jams and jellies. So that's something that we're going to have to try with these. And there are just so many of them on this bush that it's really easy to see how even a couple plants, if we added a couple more of these plants to our garden, we would have more, I think, than we would need. Now, we are getting a little bit later in the season, so you can see some of the leaves are starting to die back, but you can also see the beauty in terms of shape of these leaves, the beautiful green color as well. And while you do have to be a little bit careful, because you can see there are some pretty sizable thorns on this bush, just not really toward the end as much, toward the ends of the stems, it's actually quite an appealing looking plant. And in part, some of that appeal, of course, comes from the beautiful fruit on here. You know, each fruit has its own type of beauty, but the globes here, they remind me in terms of appearance of little ornaments. I think they look a little bit like ornaments. They look a little bit like like the ribbing on a basketball. It's a beautiful, it's an appealing plant. And again, as you're picking it and you're seeing the different colors, I mean, what a lovely, lovely looking harvest. And so that's another additional benefit to this plant. I'm going to mention one more thing, and this is just anecdotal, so I can't speak to what anyone else has experienced, just what we've experienced. I've had to put some netting over top our grapes here to try to protect those from the birds and other critters that might come along and want to eat these berries. However, the birds have completely left this plant alone, and that's pretty amazing considering how delicious these are and how similar in some ways, as I mentioned earlier, oops, I dropped one, how similar in some ways they are in terms of taste to grapes. And so I'm a little surprised that the pests don't seem to want to bother the gooseberry bush. And so that's another added benefit and reason to grow these beautiful berries. Man, there's just so many on here, and they're all so delicious. Well, I'm just getting started with this harvest. I've got a whole bunch more. I'm going to get so much fruit off of this. And so let's think about this really quickly. I believe when we bought this, we paid about $15. So $15, the first year we didn't get much fruit. The second year we started to get fruit, and now it's just plentiful year after year. Maintenance, very low. We cut it back a little bit to try to keep the shape of it, but maintenance very low, and we're getting a lot of fruit each season. So that $15 investment is paid off multiple times over. And I can't believe I didn't mention this, but this plant isn't overly particular about the growing medium either. So growing it in our native soil, our native clay soil, no problem whatsoever. So a lot of reasons laid out here why you should be growing this magnificent fruit. And I imagine those of you who grow gooseberry probably have a similar take on this plant. I honestly have never met somebody who, once they've tried, well, I guess you could be the first one, I don't know, but once they've tried this fruit, didn't tell me they found it to be absolutely delicious. Well, folks, if you're not already growing gooseberries, you should be. If you are growing gooseberries and you'd like to leave a comment and let us know your impression of this plant, we'd love to hear about it in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, we've got a couple of other videos about some of the fruit we're growing here, and I'm going to put links to those in the description. If you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to give us a like, leave us a comment, remember to share and subscribe, and most importantly, remember, when you're with us, you are good to grow.